this discussion and really celebration of the translation of I Was a French Muslim, Memoirs of an Algerian Freedom Fighter. This gorgeous book. Elaine Mokhtefi's translation of her late husband Mokhtar Mokhtefi's memoir of growing up in colonial Algeria, attending the French colonial school, then embracing the nationalist cause, joining the Armée de Libération Nationale, which has just been published by the Other Press. This is really a very singular account of the Algerian War of Liberation. Whereas many memoirs devoted to this struggle feel constrained by the tropes of an official nationalism, Mokhthefi's book narrates a personal journey from colonial occupation to independence. It is very rich in material and affective detail. It captures, I think, both the heroism, but also the everydayness, the banality of life in the army. And it also doesn't hold back on describing the internal conflicts and power struggles that would shape the political aftermath of the revolution in Algeria. For this conversation, I am delighted to welcome three people who each bring a necessary, unique perspective to the discussion. First and foremost, the book's translator, Elaine Mokhtefi. So Elaine spoke at the Maison Française. We were just discussing when it was. I think it was 2018. 2018, right. So after the publication of the memoir in French by Barzakh Press in Algiers. And at the time, she told me of her intention to translate the book. And it's quite a long book, as you can see. And this is inevitably going to come off as very ageist. But I thought, because Elaine at that time was about 88, and I wondered if you would have the energy really to carry this project through. But obviously, my doubts were very much misplaced, because in the intervening years, not only has she completed this translation, which I think really brilliantly captures the rather, free-thinking, freewheeling, ironic voice of the French original, but she's also published her own truly extraordinary memoir, which I also have here. And in case you haven't read it, please do. Algiers, Third World Capital, Freedom Fighters, Revolutionaries, Black Panthers. So to discuss the book and its translation, Elaine is joined by Amara Lakhous, an acclaimed writer who is the author of many best-selling novels written in Italian and widely translated into English, French, and other languages. They include Clash of Civilizations Over an Elevator in Piazza Vittorio and Divorce Islamic Style. Most recently, though, Amara has returned to Arabic and written a novel in Arabic, Tir al-Lail, The Night Bird. Amara is also a very close friend of Elaine and was a close friend of Mokhtars, and so I think that, Amara, you probably observed at close quarters the writing of the memoir and then the translation process. We're also delighted to welcome Judith Surkis, Professor of History at Rutgers University, who is the author of Sexing the Citizen, Masculinity and Morality in France, 1870 to 1920, published by Cornell in 2006, and Sex, Law and Sovereignty in French Algeria, 1830 to 1930, again with Cornell in 2019. And Judith's great expertise in questions of colonial law and personal identity, I think, make her the really ideal interlocutor for this book. Before I hand over to the panelists, I want to mention that right after this conversation, we'll be welcoming Karima Lazali for a discussion and celebration of the translation, the English translation of her book, Le trauma colonial, une enquête sur les effets psychiques et politiques contemporains de l'oppression coloniale en Algérie, which is just out with Polity Press. And as you'll see, there are many connections between Karim al-Azali's study and Mokhhtefi's memoir. So this is really a perfect pairing. And as always, I'd like to thank the staff of the Maison Française for their help and support in organizing these two conversations, and to thank also our co-sponsors, which are the Middle East Institute and the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society. So we decided that Elaine would speak first for a few minutes, followed by Judith, and then Amara, and then back to Elaine for a response, and then we'll open the floor to any questions or comments that you might have. So Elaine, welcome again, and over to you.
Yes, and I also thank Madeleine. She was the one who made the contact with the publisher. So thank you for coming, for listening to this story. Those of you who will read this book will learn about Algerian culture, about French racism and hardness of heart, about the war for independence as waged by an illiterate, poverty-stricken population against the fourth military power in the world, armed and supported by the United States. You will, if you are American, make comparisons with segregation in this country, aptly so. Mokhtar Mokhtefi's life spanned from 1935 to 2015. It began in a small village, 1,000 people or so, in the heart of plateau country, farmland appropriated by settlers, Europeans they were called, and cultivated by an indentured population. Mokhtar's father was a butcher, a self-made man who came down from the mountains as a youngster. He learned the trade, married, and raised 6 sons, Mokhtar being the last. His father was a pillar of the mosque. Tradition was followed to the letter. Mokhtar's mother never entered her husband's butcher shop. She was nonetheless inside her home, the queen bee, the sultana, who ruled over a brood of daughters-in-law, other in-house inhabitants. Mokhtar, the only one of the brothers to go beyond grammar school, became a student at a lycée, a French institution for the education of Europeans and a limited number of Algerians, a people with only remnants of their lost languages, patois, and the Quran. Schooling, education was in French only. Mokhtar was in fact in training to become a Frenchman. He was, however, steadfast. He remained deeply, congenitally Algerian. It was his fundamental identity, a deep-seated personal rage and love affair. Many of us who have lived there, and many who have never set foot there, will understand, for we too have entertained deep-set feelings for a country that tried our youth. I still cry for Algeria. Mokhtar spent 8 years at the lycée, during which time he organized secretly. On graduation, he enlisted in the Liberation Army and underwent training as a signal corps operator. For an idealist ready to give his life for the independence of his country, the army experience would be both exultant and devastating. He observed the leaders and the actors. He saw them as they were. He describes the vicissitudes of war, the reality of misplaced loyalty, the incapacities, the vanity, the ignorance, as well as the selflessness, comradeship, exultation, and glory. He saw them all. He knew them all. He suffered loss of innocence, a heart broken. He tells it as he lived it. I often think back at this identification with Algeria, what it must have meant for someone like Mokhtar to be able to say finally, I am Algerian. What that phrase carried with it in terms of feeling, of identity, of memory, the past and the present and the future. Then in 1976, 14 years after independence, Mokhtar turned over his 2 rooms in Algiers to his nephew and family, put his clothes in his suitcase, and left Algeria for good. He would go back from time to time to see his parents, his friends, like a tourist. He could not live under a flag of hypocrisy, condone corruption and torture in a country where one's life was determined by the power structure, not by law, in a country where the individual was denied basic freedom. He wrote at the time, quote, "My last illusions are gone. Exile remains the ultimate solution when mediocrity and feudalism triumph and return as our judges." Mokhtar would, at the end of his life, be as clairvoyant. When confronted with the doctor's diagnostic an advanced case of cancer of the liver, he announced that he had no intention of spending the time left in a merry-go-round of doctors and hospitals. He would go home and wait it out. That too was Mokhtar. That was the way he ended things, be they jobs, friendships, love affairs, politics, or his own life. We were expecting guests, Daniela and Alejandro from Argentina. Mokhtar insisted we not change plans, that we lived there 2 weeks as envisaged. It was a marvelous decision. We talked and laughed, we cooked, we invited friends, Montserrat and Pedro, Zainab, Perry, Adali, Amara, and Stephanie, Yasmina, no lamenting. Our apartment is long, one room behind the other. Mokhtar would rise in the morning, walk to the living room, and pause before the windows facing Riverside Park and the Hudson River. He would stop in front of our garden pots and contemplate the world and himself. I believe that was where he entertained essential thoughts, where he mulled over the past, where he saw himself as he was, and decided the future. One day he turned from the window and said, "Elaine, I want to be cremated. Bury my ashes in the Hudson, as close to our building as possible." Then he added, "I have to write that down, say it in my own hand. We shall go to the notary public on Broadway and have the statement notarized. My family will blame you. I want to be clear, it is my decision." And so it was. That was the very same day that Édition Barzac of Algiers informed us that they would publish Mokhtar's memoir in French. It was a week before he died. Mokhtar had a sense of accomplishment. He felt like someone who had been on a difficult, dangerous mission and had somehow prevailed. It was his final gift to Algeria and to us. Today we are proud to present this edition of Jeté Français Musulman in English, published by Other Press, the courageous, far-seeing New York editor. And last but not least, many thanks to our friends of the French Department of Columbia for bringing us all together tonight.
Wow, thank you for sharing that powerful memory. And thanks to the Maison Shanny, Madeleine, for inviting me to be here today, to Elaine for translating this book, and of course to Mokhtar for writing it. I feel actually quite humbled to be on the stage with you and to have a chance to share some of my reflections after having read it. It is a marvelous memoir of becoming and liberation. Cast by the title as a retrospective, it is notably written in a present tense that continually leaves the prospect of the future open-ended rather than closed. From the outset, we know what and who Mokhtar was, not least in the eyes and laws of the colonial legal and social system that endeavored to categorize, while purportedly also civilizing him, into a second-class and internally divided French Muslim subject. The matter of where he will arrive and by what means of conveyance is, however, far less fixed, or in the end, easy to name. As we learn from Elaine's introduction at the very end of his life, not far from here, Mokhtar self-identified not only as Algerian, but also as a world citizen. Of course, as the subtitle indicates, his is a memoir of an Algerian freedom fighter. Its power nonetheless lies not only in that presumptive end, but then rather in its lingering over arresting moments, telling scenes and sensual details. From the everyday indignities of the schoolroom and the streets of Algeria's settler colony, to the pleasures and pains of his encounter with philosophy, to the bonds of family and friendship that propel him towards the cause of independence. The staging of these moments often seems almost cinematic in animating Mokhtar's lived and embodied experiences. And I actually was commenting to Madeleine at the beginning that I feel like it would make a really fabulous film. In thinking about Mokhtar's memoir, I've also had in mind a crucial insight of historian Malika Rahal's new book, Algerie 1962, Une histoire populaire, which, precisely by revisiting autobiographies and testimonies rather than state documents, calls attention to independence as an emotional and embodied experience as much as a political and territorial idea. We feel the shame when Mokhtar is mocked in the school dormitory in Blida when he is the lone student who doesn't arrive with a proper pair of pajamas, subjected to the disdainful and chilling looks of his classmates. We relive the ambivalent pride of his academic success that he finds in this doubly alienating environment. In Frenchifying, as language as translated by Elaine that he uses, he is at once distanced from his family, mutilated as he describes it, but he also remains at a remove from the racializing codes and class privileges of his French peers. We can at the same time imagine a pleasurable revenge as he aces his exams, gaining a place in the French collège and eventually lycée, and his appointment in Constantine. We feel relief when, now on a list of suspects after becoming engaged in the movement for liberation, he manages to make the train journey from Algeria to newly independent Morocco in 1956 without being arrested. And we experience terror, thirst, and hunger as he crosses back in 1957 across that border, now fortified by the French army's treacherous Maurice line on foot and in the night on his way to take up his post as a radio signal technician inside Algeria. As he describes that moment, the idea of crossing the border soon is energizing. Tonight, my dream of returning to my country with the National Liberation Army will come true. I'm going to walk on our national soil as a free man, armed to the teeth with the privilege of my training as a radio operator. As this revealing passage intimates, the narrative thrill of following Mokhtar on these moments in his journey derives more from a quest for freedom that propels him forward, a freedom to be gained in and through Algeria's liberation, than a search for a secure and stable Algerian identity or a desire to gain a place in its emerging and violently contested new political order. The memoir thus provokes an extended reflection on the troubled relationship between the personal and national Bildungsroman as it traces a less than linear path from childhood to the threshold of adulthood in an independent Algeria. In the present tense of the memoir, Mokhtar's multiple displacements are lived as contingent and contradiction-filled. As bumpy as his first bus ride from his bus town in Bouragia to Media to take his first school entrance exam. This is not an unfolding of a predestined plan. Mokhtar is in constant motion, taking leave and arriving, to Blida, to Algiers, to Constantine, to Marseille and the Riviera, to Casablanca, to Tunis, to Tripoli, to Cairo, to Naples, back to Tunis. The memoir ends with one last border crossing when Mokhtar and his companion, the French medical militant Annette Roger, planned to return on the eve of independence in her Fiat. Their way appears to be blocked by, quote, a forest of barbed wire held up by pickets, the macabre Maurice and Shaw lines. But contingency is on their side. They find an opening in the fence. Again, a revealing detail that powerfully symbolizes the failures of militarized efforts to divide territories and people and imbibe violent legal and material technologies of containment. It is here, through this unofficial and unmanned entryway, that Mokhtar finds his way back home to Algeria on July 1st, 1962, liberated from the mutilated status as a French Muslim. But ending on this threshold, the question of what emerged from that liberation is left open, undecided, and unclear. Mokhtar's return to the newly liberated homeland on July 1st is notably made as a civilian. He renounces his military identity and the promise of a pension to do so, and refuses the political and politicized command of Rousseff to wait until August. He refuses to fold to the dictates of interests of a military hierarchy strategizing to seize the reins of power. This is a decidedly unofficial and transgressive return that nonetheless holds out a liberatory promise. And it reprises a powerful and inspirational motif throughout the memoir, namely Mokhtar's refusal to recognize political efforts to construct and police national, religious, and communitarian borders, both within and in between states. Mokhtar's journey toward freedom, one which remains open at the end of the book, is thus linked to a recognition of the artifice and violence of such internal and external frontiers, exemplified but not reducible to the internal contradictions of the French Muslim. This is not to say that those borders and boundaries aren't real, or at least do not have real and indeed mortal effects, but throughout the memoir he is attentive to and interested in figures, ideas, technologies, and feelings that also move across them. This is, of course, the power of the radio and Morse code that make communication possible between the internal and external resistance. It is evident in his admiration for Catholic militants and French allies who lend support for the cause, and his sense of solidarity with the nomadic Saharan tribesmen who lead his radio unit back across the Moroccan frontier in their, quote, refusal to pay any attention to the borders invented by the colonists, refusing in their case, as with his own family, to posit a facile opposition between tradition and modernity. He draws a parallel between their history and the destiny of the Maghreb. Over the course of the memoir, it is this search for openings that makes liberation possible. Those who are incapable of similar cross-border thinking and feeling are its obstacles, from racist French school teachers and policemen, petty and power-hungry FLN military authorities, and Bianca, his Italian girlfriend, who remains too attached to Catholic dogma to be able to imagine a life and a family together with him. When confronted with these obstacles, Mokhtar insistently moves on, finding an alternative path, leaving the reader on the cusp of independence. I Was a French Muslim recreates that sense of exhilarating opening, even as it hints at how and why post-independence Algeria could lose its way. It is an ending that refuses closure, looking beyond the nation-state as panacea, open to other experiences of freedom, engagement, and pleasure. And I thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Judith. Amara.
Thank you. Thank you, Madeleine. As you said in your introduction, this is a celebration. So I'm here to celebrate this book. And I have to say that Elaine started translating this book in very, very hard moment because she was looking for an agent to publish her book, and they are just refusing the manuscript. And in that moment, and I saw the courage and resilience of Elaine. It's unbelievable, It's hard to describe her courage. For me, for a lot of friends, she is a model. She's source of so fantastic, and we are very happy and we are very lucky to have her. So I met Elaine and Mokhtar when I moved to New York in 2014, and that meeting was magical, really magical. Let's get started with the nom de guerre of Mokhtar during the war. Is Amara, or was Amara, my name. And my name in Algeria is not common. It's not very common. So Mokhtar's nom de guerre was Amara, and a lot of his friends, old friends, called him Amara, not Mokhtar. And this is incredible for a Muslim, like me. I believe in destiny, in Maktub. It was something. This is the first. The second thing, during that meeting, Elaine and Mokhtar told me about their memoirs, and they are writing their memoirs. And I realized it was something very, very, very strong. And it's in French we say raison de vie, de vivre. It's something very important for them. And I was challenging to write about Algeria because I left Italy to come here in New York, and I escaped Algeria actually in 1995. And in Italy I was protected by Italy, by Italian literature. I started writing in Italian, and I kept Algeria in the side. What happened when I moved to New York, I lost that protection. So thanks to Elaine and Mokhtar, I connected to the best part of Algeria. And in 2019, I published my novel. It's about 60 years of Algeria. And there is a character in the novel inspired by Mokhtar. It's Mokhtar. I changed the name, but he is Mokhtar. It's the best. And now the book, as we have the translator here from Arabic to English, Alexander Inson. He just finished the translation, and I'm very happy because it's achievement of that day, the dreams. So we didn't become friends. We became a family. We started, my wife and I, calling Mokhtar and Elaine uncle and auntie, ammi and auntie. This is, and we. It was fantastic. Every week we met at dinner, and we were talking, of course, talking about Algeria. And Mokhtar once told me, Algeria is l'Algérie, c'est notre maladie. Algeria is our disease, and trauma. This is a trauma. If you suffer from trauma, you have to talk. You have to tell stories. You have to write. This is the only way to cure yourself. And we did this. In 2018, I went to Algeria. I lived almost 2 years in Oran to write the novel. It was difficult, and Elaine came. And we presented her book in the biggest theater in Oran. It's our dreams. Our dreams came true. It's fantastic how So during the Christmas 2014, Elaine sent me the manuscript of Mokhtar. So I read it in French, and I was really impressed. Really, really impressed. It was something original, something new, because the whole memoirs in Algeria written by the freedom fighters were superheroes. They were angels. And in this book, I'm going to read 2 pages. He's man. I felt the sincerity. I said, this man is sincere. And why I am saying that this book in Algeria is a turning point for people who want to write memoirs. This is a model. If you want to write a good memoir, you have to be sincere. So I'm going to write and I'm going to read a passage, a fantastic, really fantastic passage, written in French, beautiful, and translation. Elaine made fantastic translation. The tone, the voice is there. So I'm going to read the English translation. So, but just a little background. So, you know, in Algeria and other country who are suffering from dictatorships or pseudo-democracy or so on. So the intelligence is something very tough. I mean, you can't, you know, people are scared. You know, scared about the like Stasi in Germany, East Germany, or so. So in this passage, Mokhtar tells the story of his meeting with Bossouf. Bossouf is the founder of the secret intelligence in Algeria. So this is, I mean, he is a myth. People are scared about him during the war, and he was involved in assassinations. It's very terrible man, really very terrible man. And we are in 1960. Okay, Mokhtar went to talk to him about Bianca. This is unbelievable. In 1960, you are with a terrible man, you know, terrible man, and I'm going to read this. In these pages, you can understand the taste of the book. I continue to correspond with Bianca, although I write less than that she does. In her letters, she tells me about her daily routine, her relationships with her sister Aurora, her parents, her friends. She talks of what she feels, her dreams of our life together. I don't want Bossouf to discover our correspondence through one of his numerous agents who swarm around the city and the administrations. I can't bear hiding from my future wife my real identity. He was member of the MALG, you know, the MALG was the original Algerian intelligence. I finally request an appointment for personal reasons. He receives me. I tell him outright, calling him by his wartime alias, Si Mabrouk, I have to come to speak to the militant. I don't wish to keep to myself or for you to be told in some other way. What I have to tell you, in Tripoli, in Libya, I met a young Italian who was on vacation. I have told this woman that I can't marry her before independence. All I am asking you for is the authorization to continue to write to her. This is the response of Bossouf. There is nothing wrong with this, but before giving you my reply, I would like to see her letters. And if you have one, a picture of her. He concludes after listening to me without interruption. I am about to get up and go when the courtyard door opens and Colonel Boumediene enters. Boumediene became the president. Okay? Bossouf looks insistently at his watch and says roughly, "It's only now that you arrive?" The colonel's face turns red as a beef. He doesn't say hello to me. I walk out. Bossouf, the militant, this is the irony, Bossouf, the militant, to whom I addressed my request, entrusts Khalifa Laroussi with communicating his negative reply. With a tired voice, he begins with a weak speech, paternalistic and pseudo-revolutionary, in which he invokes a drama, Corneille's Horace, and then asks me to sacrifice the love of women for the revolution. Sick, with my heart in my stomach, I got up to leave. You can count on me, I say, shaking the weak hand that he tenders. The little consideration that I have for the man, Bossouf, is gone for all time. We are in 1960, okay? We have 1 minute okay. So naturally, I have been careful not to give Bossouf the address of the grocery store where both Hilal, his friend, and I receive our email. I continue to write to Bianca. The idea of visiting her secretly in Naples occurs to me when the minister grants a bonus for clothes, followed almost immediately with a 2-week furlough. My decision is taken. I obtain a visa at the Italian consulate and buy a round-trip ticket on Tirrenia, which sails between Tunis, Palermo, and Naples. I don't want to be absent for more than a week. The day before I am to leave, I run into Hamid Bouchakji, alias Younes, who is in a hurry to get lunch before the end of the service. So we are going to Italy, he says, smiling but not stopping. How do you know? I say weakly. Never mind, but don't worry. Bon voyage, he laughs, while running to lunch. Bouchakji is the assistant of the director of vigilance and counterintelligence. He probably read my correspondence with Bianca. We have known each other since Casablanca, where we were both members of FLN Economics Commission. Bianca is waiting for me at the dock. Happy, she cries with joy, mixes up French and Italian, enchanted. Moved, I am on a cloud. Feel ready to defy the universe to keep my Bianca. She has reserved a room for me in a pension close to the one she lives in. She can come to my room, but I can't go to hers. She can't wait to show me her city. We visit her favorite places. Nationalistic, I compare the superb bay of Naples with that of Algiers. Did you know that the capital of my country is called Algiers la Blanche, la Bianca? She laughs, thinks I'm joking. She is used to my calling her my Bianca, my dog. I practice my assimil Italian. I hum some songs. She never stopped complimenting me. Stimulated by her encouragement, I yell out one day in a crowd, my face raised, Italia farà da sé. Italy will do it alone. Garibaldi's words, the father of Italian unity. She listens to my political speeches, raises her head, stares at me. When I stop pulling her hair, she asks, do you love me? Tell me that you love me. I love you with my very soul. I will love you all my life. I promise you that we will get married as soon as Algeria is independent. We will have as many children as you wish. She can't imagine, this is a very important message. She can't imagine that with this trip I run the risk of death for desertion or espionage for foreign power. I can't give her a greater proof of my love. So, the end of the story. So, what happened after this meeting with Bossov? Bossov didn't. Of course, they found out. They found out the letters, etc. And his trip. Bossov didn't arrest him. Bossov asked him to join the delegation to visit Egypt, to visit the Egyptian President Nasser. So Bossov respected him. This is the thing. He respected him. He respected his courage. I think we don't have maybe in the conclusion, or I can say something about the title. I have something to say about the title.
Elaine, back to you. Would you like to respond, add anything to what Judith?
Well, it's one of the things that's very interesting in the story about Bianca, which Amara didn't tell us, was that she said that she claimed that she would have to raise their children in the Catholic religion. Whereupon Mokhtar said, no way. They don't necessarily have to be Muslim, but they definitely don't have to be Catholic. And she said that the Pope would demand that they be Catholic. So when he got back to Tunis, he thought about it and he wrote to her and he broke off. that was the end of his relationship with Bianca. It was a principle that he could not accept, that religion be thrown down their throats, and that they be obliged to raise their children in a given religion. And he was already, you see, coming out of the closeness of his family and their upbringing and so on. He was already beginning to become an individual and a new man, what he hoped would be an Algerian.
So in a moment we'll, do you want to add more?
What?
Did I interrupt you?
No, not at all. No.
So in a moment we'll open up to any questions or comments. But maybe just while you think about things you might like to ask or to say, I'm going to ask you a first question, Elaine. So I'm going to come at this a little bit with, I'm wearing my literature scholar hat. So I wonder if you could tell us anything about the literary influences on Mokhtar, because as Judith mentioned, there's a kind of Bildungsroman dimension to this, and the beginning in particular, it feels quite a bit like a novel by Mouloud Feraoun or Mouloud Mameri perhaps. So I wonder, if you could say something about what he read that might have influenced the way he approached writing his memoir.
He was certainly, one of his favorite writers was Roger Martin du Gard. And he must have read the Thibaut, I don't know, 4 times. He loved Roger Martin du Gard. And Roger Martin du Gard also wrote a very famous book against religion, a novel. And also, it was a tremendous influence on him. He read Proust, he read Sartre, he read all the French, and he was constantly buying books. One of his, I can tell you this one small story about him and books, and that is that he was in France once and bought a number of French books which he brought back into Algeria, and they were taken away from him by the censor at the airport. He knew the man who was head of the censors, and had been in the army with him. And so we went to the very next day he went to see him, and he said, what is the meaning of this? That these books were taken away from me? There's nothing subversive about books. And the man gave him a whole spiel about the bad effects of certain books on Algerian citizens and blah, blah, blah. So he called the airport and he released the books. But of course, when Mokhtar got to the airport, half the books were gone. But the fact is, the matter was that he would not stop. He had to finish the story. He couldn't stop halfway and let them just take them away and diminish him as a man, as a citizen, as someone capable of bringing in books to Algeria.
Thank you. So let me open the floor to any questions or thoughts or reactions. Yes.
There's a microphone.
Yes, the microphone is coming.
And my wife read the book every night.
Is it on? Thank you.
The light is on.
No.
There's a-
I'm allowed to speak. Thank you.
here's the.
That's better.
Much better.
Great.
Well, first of all, we were given a copy of the book by Elaine. And of course I bought a whole bunch and gave it to our friends to read. But we read it every night and would read it out loud for an hour or so, and or sometimes 2 hours. And I still cannot believe that this is the translation. It is unbelievable. It is unbelievably English. There is no indication of anywhere this being translated from French or any other language. So Elaine, thank you very much for the lovely job that you've done. That's my comment.
It is.
I mean,
Go ahead.
I understand her better.
He was just saying that you gave him a copy of the book, that he shared it with a lot of people, but also read it. It was a livre de chevet. They were reading it every night for several hours, and that your translation is so perfect that it didn't feel at all like a translation. It didn't seem as though it had been written in another language.
Well, I had the feeling that it developed in English just practically automatically. It was very rarely that I very rarely used a dictionary. It just seemed to me that it just translated automatically into English. It was as though I was just a typist. Mokhtar hesitated many years before we came to the United States, mainly because he didn't speak English, and he had studied in high school as a second language Arabic, because he felt that Algerian Arabic was a kind of patois. It was an emasculated language, and that he should know his own basic language, which was Arabic, and so he took it as a foreign language. And most of his comrades took English, and he didn't. And he felt handicapped by the fact that he didn't speak English. But when he came here, he went to Teachers College and studied English, and those of you who know him knew that he spoke quite well. He did fairly well. He even made some speeches in English. After 9/11, he was called upon by several of our friends to come and talk and explain and try to make people understand what had happened.
I was just going to say that this evening is really a celebration of books, books about Algeria, about the personal and the political in Algeria, but it's also a celebration of translations and translators, which is a nice and important thing to do. So I think there's another question or comment.
My question is the following. When was the book written?
When was the book written?
It was written in 2014 and 15. He died in April 2015, and it really put the finishing touches on the book just maybe a month before he died, and we sent it to Selma Halal, who in Algiers. She and her husband are the head of the of an Algerian publishing house. It's probably the best of the publishing houses in Algeria. And Selma's father was a comrade of Mokhtar's during the war, and he was very upset by the book, actually, and told his daughter not to publish it, simply because Mokhtar said too much.
Yeah.
He said too much, and her father was part of the intelligence network in independent Algeria, and he weren't this kind of language,
Story or
this way of telling the story of the war, published, and tried to stop it. And Selma was very strong, and she published every word of it. We made no concessions to Algerian politics.
Thank you for your answer. No, I just have a slight comment. It's about the title of the book.
The title.
It says,
Title.
I was a French
Mhm.
Muslim. Before 1962, the Algerians didn't have a citizenship. We were called just Muslims. We were called les indigènes, but in a very pejorative way. We are not called the indigènes just before, meaning that you are the authentic people of the country. For them it was in the pejorative way. So why your late husband actually chose the word French?
Can you respond?
Okay. Amara
Okay,
is
thank
going
you,
to.
because I'm involved in the title. So
He's involved in the title.
I am obsessed with titles. So the original title of the book was Ma part de vérité, my part of truth. When I read it, I said to him, I said to Elaine when we met, I don't like the title, because readers should find the truth inside the book, in your stories, not putting the truth in the title. I did. So one night, one evening, we were having dinner at Elaine's and Mokhtar's apartment. We were four. There was my wife too, and we were talking about France, immigration, and Islam. And I said that today in France and in Italy, in Germany, there is a fashion of name Muslim, Italian Muslim, German Muslim, Italian Muslim, French Muslim. I mean, instead of considering people citizens, all citizens, they start. And in France is a scandal, because France is a secular country. With the religion you have, so theoretically. Theoretically. So they are using this concept of French colonial. And Mokhtar, I remember, he stopped eating, and when he was with anger, he said, "J'étais français musulman," and he explained that during the colonization, he was under sous homme, under human. He was not human. And now they are using the same category in treating citizens or special citizens in French. And if you follow the presidential campaign today, it's unbelievable how Algeria is involved in the debate. It's incredible. And Mokhtar was right when he said Algeria est une maladie. Une maladie, disease, not, I think in sense that is pain, is difficult, but you have to face this, this trauma. It's about trauma. This is the title of the book and the presentation. And so then, I'm very happy that they kept the title, because the title is a big opportunity today. Today, and this is the legacy of Mokhtar's book, to understand the issue of immigration, the issue of Islam, and how France betrayed its values. So France, with colonization, betrayed his values, the French Revolution, fraternité, égalité, liberté, it's a freedom very hard, and this is and then they betrayed the secularism, adding religion in public debate.
I want to also turn to Judith on this question, because the issue of identities and colonial, legal, and political categories is so much your field,
Right.
that maybe you have something also to add about it.
So it actually, I mean, the legal history of the status is obviously dense and complicated. I mean, it was, or it actually did become a technical French legal term. And after the Second World War, right, technically, Algerian men at least acceded to second-class citizenship, and then after 58, they were, at least in principle, men and women citizens. Which doesn't mean that there wasn't rampant and violent racism that continued to function and operate during the war and after. I guess what I sort of tried to evoke in my comments is that for me the power of the title was precisely that it was framed in the past tense, right? So that it is about, and that part of many of the very moving passages in the book for me were a kind of give an account of what he describes as the kind of mutilated and painful experience of not just being positioned as a legal subject, but also as the subject of this kind of civilizing intervention that attempts to Frenchify him and, in a sense, appropriate him. And so the sense of liberation that I sort of find in these kind of moments of crossing back across the border into the now free Algeria are performances of that escape from the assigned status, right? So that it's not, I don't read it as a kind of identification with the label, but a move to get beyond it. While at the same time recalling to memory the fact that there were Algerian subjects were French nationals who were Muslim, which is, I think, actually important to remember today.
Yeah.
So my colleagues are giving me the signal that we need to wind this down. We're not really bringing the conversation to an end because we're going to continue it in the discussion with Karim El-Azali, since there are so many shared themes here. So really this is a celebration of books, translations. Also a lot was said about publishers, independent publishers, Barzakh in Algiers, the other press, Polity Press. But above all, I think it's a celebration of you, Elaine, as has been said by Amara and Judith. You are kind of beyond being inspirational, I think, and it's so sustaining to be in proximity to you, because you just embody so much resilience and commitment and energy and really truth that I just want to thank you for being you.